Hey there, spacers. Welcome to the Space Revolution. My name is Rick Tumlinson. You are listening to iRock Space Radio. We're part of the iHeart Radio Network. And we're going to have a fun show tonight or today, whenever you're listening to this on the sphere we call the Earth. I have a great guest, and his name is J. Trent Adams. Trent is what I referred to. I was kind of teasing him before we started as a Renaissance dude. He is a bit of everything, and I mean everything. You're going to be amazed by a couple of things we talk about here. And But his background, he went to Vassar College in NYC, and has his rent paying background, as he refers it, is in security, where for 6 years he was with PayPal, in the security ecosystem division. And then recently, you kind of have your own thing you're doing in that area, but identity, privacy, security, almost none of which we will talk about today, because we're a space show. But we might hit on a little of that regarding space, actually, at some point here. But really, what we're going to talk about is Trent's work as a board member of the Analog Astronaut Foundation. This is a group that I'm really excited about because those of you who know my background with the Earthlight Foundation, part of our work is that over time, we believe there are going to be groups that evolve, who are self-selected groups, who are ones who, over time, develop the passion, the capability, and hopefully the finances to be able to say, hey, Elon, hey, Jeff, hey, Rocket Lab, whoever it is who can carry us out into the solar system. We want to buy a ride on one of your ships and maybe, X number of ships for resupply. And we're going to the moon, or we're going to Mars, or we're going to build a habitat and go live there. And so the Analog Astronaut Foundation focuses in on variations on doing that now. And I'm not going to get too far into it because that's why we have a guest and an expert. But it's really exciting. And so, Trent, you guys just had an event at the Biosphere. There's a whole long conversation to be had about the Biosphere and the history of it, but they've kept it running. It is a beautiful place, and I'm just going to let you describe it and describe the event. And welcome, sir.
Hey, thank you. Rick, I really appreciate the opportunity. Especially the audience that you've helped cultivate. I think it's absolutely fantastic to bring everybody together. And as we move forward in this space exploration next phase, right? The commercialization of space. And that's kind of what we're all doing, is trying to figure this out together. So what's fascinating about the work that we are doing in the Analog Astronaut Foundation is building a community of those folks who are specifically working in the industry of research and development for what that next phase is in human space exploration, right? And up until recently, when Jazz Perel and Cyan Proctor brought the community together, all of the researchers were kind of working on their own in silos, or working on one project or working on another project, but not really sharing a lot of the commonalities and a lot of the experiences that they had in the various analog habitats. And that's what we look to do, is to bring these people together and have a conversation, share information, share knowledge, and propel the conversation forward. And that's where they just came back from, is the third Analog Astronaut Conference, Analog Astronaut Community Conference, at the Biosphere 2 project in Arizona. And it was an absolutely fantastic event. I cannot overstate the value of bringing a couple hundred people together who work in this industry, sharing notes and moving progress forward. Absolutely fantastic group of people that we can all learn from. Absolutely amazing.
And So Cyan, as we all know, or those who listen probably do know, flew herself into space. I'm sure you want to go at some point. But what kinds of other people? A little more, dig in a little bit more. The kind of people, and I gather some of them actually have organized groups themselves, right? They're already out doing the analog thing. Can you give us some of those examples?
Yeah, honestly, before I got plugged into the group a few years back, I had in my head what the analog astronaut community and research was doing, right? Um, and I had it in my head that it was, kind of in the NASA style, where you had a broad selection process for crews, and you had research, a phalanx of research work that needed to be done, and you bring, that work together, and you kind of select and develop this as a cohesive whole. And it turns out that I learned through the experience of collaborating with these folks that that's not the case. It actually turns out that they're all very discrete projects that are being run almost independently. There's
Mm.
a little bit of sharing kind of just through the network of people who know each other, but there's no formalized mechanism for collaborating across these research activities. And so what, I would meet these people who were doing this work, and then I would say, well, that's very similar to that work being done over there. Have you talked to each other? Are you working? Are you sharing? And that's the gap that really we tried to find a way to fill. And I say we because I like to say, that we're all collaborating on this, but really it was just a handful of folks who got together and figured this stuff out. Again, like Cyan and Jazz and others. And it is kind of like what you're saying. There's these other activities and pockets of folks doing work. And the question is, how can you pull them together? So just as an example, again, I literally just got off the plane from the latest meeting, so I'm still processing. But the amazing diversity, inclusiveness, and equality of all these people is a true representation of humanity on Earth, pulling this work together, and it is not at all like what has come before us. So what's come before us is a very strictly selected group of individuals that did not necessarily act as a cross section of humanity. You've got the test pilots, you've got the scientists, you've got the engineers who are all kind of self-selected. Where are the janitors, right? Where are the artists? Where are the passionate individuals that are not necessarily working in the industry directly? Where are these people, right? And so this is what we brought together, and you've got this amazing cross section. And I think you touched on my background a little bit, whereby I work in the technology sector, right? I work on cybersecurity. I attend a lot of scientific and technology conferences around the world, and I have never seen a cross section of humanity as I have seen at the Analog Astronaut Community Conference. It is a true representative of what humans are like at this conference that I've never seen in another technical conference before. And it's when you pull those threads of the artists and the poets, and the engineers and the, lack of a better term, the janitors, right? The people who make sure the plumbing is working. As a great example, I was talking to Hank Rogers, who is a driver of High Seas, which is an analog facility, an analog hab in Hawaii. And yeah, they had plumbing problems. If you don't have a plumber in your mission, you're going to run into problems. So these are things you actually have to think about and worry about and consider beyond just the test pilots, beyond just the scientists and engineers. And that's the group of people that we bring together in these in this community to share not just the you know sexy let's go to space thing, but oh yeah, we had to roll up our sleeves and figure the plumbing out. And that's the kind of thing that this community brings together, such that when we move to the next phase of space exploration, we're going to need folks like this. They're going to need to be trained up. They're going to need to understand what all of the challenges are, and they're going to need to be ready to engage with those challenges and overcome them. And that's kind of what we have here is this group of people who um, fill those gaps that have historically and traditionally been kind of overlooked or not otherwise involved in the conversation.
So there were private nonprofit groups. Were there any government groups and any international? What did you get from the
Oh,
international side?
okay. So you've asked a multivariant question there.
Yeah, of course.
So the interesting thing, as we all know in this industry, right? Government entities have a tendency to be very cautious in their engagement. There's a lot of paperwork that needs to be filled out and authorizations that need to be provided when you say you are operating in a colloquium on behalf of that giant entity, a government, as an example.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the things that, yes, there were participants in the most recent event and within the community who do nominally represent or otherwise are contributing on behalf of these government agencies. That being said, they're very circumspect about their involvement, and I think that's just paperwork and red tape, honestly. So that's that answer. I wish I could. I wish I could tell you the governments and agencies that were involved. We kind of are not in a position to be able to do so. That being said, they were there. Internationally, I can tell you it was amazing the number of countries that were involved. Again, I'm just coming off of this, having landed yesterday. If I were to guess, I'd say a half a dozen different countries were represented at the organization, and quite a handful of them were what I would consider underrepresented in the international space exploration community as it currently
Mm-hmm.
exists, which I think is absolutely fantastic. That we're reaching deep into those countries and communities around the world that should be represented and need to be represented. Their voices need to be heard. And we're hoping to provide that conduit of information in a more ad hoc kind of process. So yeah, there were a lot of different countries involved.
Can you rattle off a couple?
Um,
I didn't mean to nail you
yeah,
there, but I'm just
yeah,
very curious.
and again, as a member of the foundation, I have to make sure that I'm careful not to um, represent.
Don't say it officially, but just
Correct.
a
Yeah.
couple of nations that might have been represented.
Yeah,
I'm just
so we
curious
had
about
some
that.
from Mexico. We had some from a couple of African countries. We had a couple from Asian countries, and all of these countries were represented by various. I don't know if they're officially designated as NGOs, but definitely in that caliber of space where they
Mm-hmm.
are non-governmental, but yet uh, uh, nonprofit organizations that represent space exploration around the world. So yeah, I'd
Yeah,
say about a half a dozen or so different distinct countries were represented in the conversation.
that's fantastic. Yeah, I don't know if they were there. I think they may not be. There's the Mongolians have actually been playing in this area. I am probably not there, but
Now,
and
honestly, they could have been there. I didn't. It was a couple hundred people. You can't meet everyone. Um,
yeah, sure, sure. But the point I'm making, I think, is that this is not a U.S. thing.
Correct.
This is a human thing,
I
right?
love that you said that. It is human driven. It's not nation driven. And I think that's
Right.
what we're all seeing in this next phase of space exploration.
Mm-hmm. Well, so look, I have a bit of a history here. We actually haven't chatted about this, but many years ago, I was running an endowment called the Fines Endowment Foundation for the International Non-Government Development of Space, and we gave this guy, a friend of mine named Bob Zubrin, some money to start a thing called the Mars Society. and he got it matched and launched it. Um, I love to tease Bob because he immediately kicked me off his board once the check cleared because I used the other M word at the time, which was moon, and that was not acceptable. But now we're friends, and Bob has opened up his worldview, his universe view. But what's interesting, always was interesting to me, is that they had a facility um, in Newfoundland called the Flashline Mars Research Facility, which was one of the first non-government analogs. And I think you can still see pictures with our logo FINDS right by the hatch there. So it's always a point of pride because I really believe in this idea of this being more than a government activity and more than any single government's activity and more than about just science,
Right.
right? This is bigger than that. So, look, we're going to come back. We're going to kind of play around with just the topic itself because I know you have a depth and breadth of understanding of it. And we'll have some fun with that. So stay tuned, folks. You are listening to iRock Space Radio, part of the iHeartRadio network. My name is Rick Tumlinson, and this is the Space Revolution. Hey there, Spacers. Welcome back. Rick Tumlinson here, the Space Revolution on iRock Space Radio, part of the iHeartRadio network. We have a guest today, Trent Adams. We're having a conversation about analog astronauts. Now, let's be very, very clear. You, the listener, are qualified, most likely, to be an analog astronaut because there's one qualification that you are human and you can survive basically without life support. Maybe you have with life support, actually, probably still could anyway. But you are a human being, and that's what this is about. This is about little bubbles of humans expanding out into the solar system, expanding the domain of life, and moving out. But what's really cool about what Trent and the folks at Analog Astronauts are doing is that they're starting now. They're practicing, they're learning, they're trading information, learning skills. And Trent, I do have to say one thing. You mentioned the janitors, and I know you were using that as like regular folks who aren't alpha astronauts, right? By the way, it's been my opinion for a long time that the alpha male astronaut's probably the first person to get voted out the airlock, right? They're not going to be good for like working with teams. But yeah, I've jotted some notes down. I'll probably do an op-ed on this, but the idea that one of the qualifications in my mind for really being on a team that goes is you have to ask somebody the question like, have you ever uh, built or renovated a house? Right? Have you ever done electrical wiring, plumbing, all of those basic things? And you touched on that in the first section. It's this because we have this glory, this idea like, oh, I'm a jet pilot, I'm Tom Cruise, I've done this, I'm a NASA right stuffer, this kind of thing, or ESA right stuffer, or cosmonaut, whatever. But actually, so much of what happens in these habitats is just basic maintenance, basic stuff. And the reason I highlight that, and I'm going to let you speak about that in a second, is that what that means is so many more people have the basic skills than this image we give ourselves about astronauts is all about, right? You got skills. If you could fix a car or plumbing or a computer, right? Tell us about that.
Yeah, I think you've hit on exactly the kind of this next phase, right? I mean, everything comes in phases. You have to have that first phase, which is the launching into the unknown and the willingness to be that explorer that you have to have a certain gene for I might not come back right from this. Once you've kind of broken that barrier, and we see this in historically in exploration. Once you've broken that barrier, it opens up the opportunity to say, well, wait a minute, great, let's move this colony, let's move this group of people from point A to point B along this line that was broken open by these intrepid explorers. Now, frankly, not everyone is going to be that one who crosses, the ocean for the first time, or explores the Antarctic or whatever. But once you've done that and you get those lessons learned, you build a conduit for moving humanity into what you've just unlocked. And it's maybe from the gamification, it's the unlocking of the achievement, right? And once we've unlocked that achievement, we can move into another phase. And that's the phase we're in now. And that phase we're in is moving more of a cross section of humanity. Now, we're still, honestly, we are still in the position of needing that next wave of intrepid explorers. Not necessarily ready for the broad population of everybody who's used to creature comforts that we are in modern society. It's just not there yet. No matter where we go, we're not there yet. As an example, we ran the first SAM mission at the Biosphere 2. For those, if your listeners aren't aware, so Biosphere 2, which is this amazingly big, audacious project. I think you did a piece on that before. Um, they've now taken the initial the test habitat that was used prior to the building of the Biosphere 2, and they've refurbished it. And it's been refurbished into a modern analog astronaut habitat. And we just launched. We were proud to see the first group go through this newly furbished hab, and it's now going to be an on-running uh, uh, habitat for the analog astronaut community, just like any of the other habs around the world. And it's got some really unique features to it. If we get time, happy to dig into it. But what we did is we were able to leverage the being the first mission to kind of do the shakedown cruise of it. Right, we ran the first team through there for a week, and it was an inclusive mission. By the way, it was we had the first blind analog astronaut running through there, and it as well as others, to flesh out the crew of four. And it was amazing what we learned through that exercise in twofold. Number one is a brand new hab. What issues do you run into? What are the things that you thought was a good idea or you didn't think about, and then you run that first mission. You're like, yeah, lessons learned. Take the notes. Make it better for the next group. Similarly, with the inclusive nature of it, with the first a blind crew member, there were a lot of things that we thought through, and then when she was walking through the hab and performing the tasks, we realized things we need to improve. And it was amazing testament to the mission support crew that we were running two missions, one mission for a week, and then we took a pause. They egressed, addressed all the issues that were brought up, and we're rolling back in with the second crew this week. And it's amazing to see all the lessons learned and how they were quickly adapted to. And I think that that's what you're speaking to, is that when people show up and start actually operating in this environment, well, what are the things that you don't think about? What are the things that you need to do? And it's all of this lessons learned that we're feeding back into the community and learning about.
Interesting. Can you give us an example of something you didn't anticipate? Something that, like, oops.
Right. Yeah. So, a good example might be in this one hab, in the SAM hab. And the SAM is a very unique habitat around the
What does
world.
SAM stand for, by the way?
Uh, why do you ask me questions that I should know the answer to, Rick? This is
That's all right. Fine. Skip right by it. But
let's
something module.
uh, something about analog for Mars and the Moon.
Okay,
It's
there we
maybe
go. Right.
simulated analog for for Mars and the Moon. We'll go with that for now.
I'm going to
Um,
just say yes. Okay.
there we go.
I'm terrible with this stuff myself. Not a problem.
Once come on, we all live in the space industry here, right? Everything
Right. We
has an
use them so much we forget where they're derived. I
oh,
totally got it.
that's
Totally
exactly
cool.
it. In my day job for cybersecurity, everything has an acronym, and even some of the technologies I helped develop, I don't. People ask me on interviews that say, "Well, what is this?" I don't know. It's just a
Nah,
thing
no
that does a
problem.
thing. So what's interesting about the SAM analog is that it is hermetically sealed. Now, most analogs are not built to the rigors um, of engineering such that they can be hermetically sealed, and this one is. Now it's because it was built that way in in the 80s, right? So it was built
Hmm.
in the early 80s, and so we can it was refurbished, by the team at uh, uh, in Arizona, and they refurbished the hermetic seals. So what you have is you've got what's called a lung, and the lung is essentially a really large um, space that normalizes the pressure within the hab, because as you know, during the day, right, in the moon or Mars, whatever, as soon as the sun comes over, it's going to heat up the space, and as it heats up the
Hmm. Hmm.
space, as we all know, right, you've got an expansion of the atmosphere, and then as the sun sets, you've got a cooling of the atmosphere, and you've got a contraction of the atmospheric pressure. Well, you need some mechanism by which that it compensates for that, and in
Hmm.
the SAM analog, they have a giant lung that move this piston moves up and down based on the ambient pressure in order to normalize it. And one of the things that was interesting is you have to keep track of this, right? So one of the tasks, as you said, is it's a daily task. It's not necessarily engineering. It's not necessarily research driven, but it is a thing that you need to do for maintenance, and you have to keep track of how is this operating. And so one of the tasks of the engine or of the a mission crew is to just document this over time and make sure that it's within operating parameters. And what they found with the a blind crew member is, well, we were measuring that with a tape, a measuring tape with no indication for a blind operator to know, what the different uh, markings
Hmm.
were on that. And so what she did is she very quickly realized, well, we need to add markings on this tape so that a blind operator can go in and feel the tape and understand what the pressure was of this giant piston. Is it operating within parameters? And so she added that. And we need to make it
Oh.
more robust. But it was a thing that was really quickly identified as, well, shoot, we didn't even think about that. It's one of those things that is going into the books of, well, when you do these kinds of things, this is what you need to think about.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting too because whether or not the person is you have a blind person, if you were in an emergency situation, a low light situation, it'd be the same
Yeah,
fix.
you
So
have
yeah,
hit
it's broader than that. Hmm?
you have hit on it. That is exactly the point. I wish I could remember the astronaut's name who was doing a spacewalk and lost vision because of the accumulation of
Hmm.
liquid in the helmet. And absolutely, it's not that that astronaut was blind; it was that the astronaut was blinded by the circumstances. And so,
Yep.
absolutely, this kind of learning is real world applicable. 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. Very, very cool. Well, look, there's just so much to go into here. But I'm just, when I first talked to you about this before the conference, I got so excited because it's a thing, and I've been wanting to see this thing happening, right? And for a long time, and we've got this intersection coming up of, this moment in time where people are actually going to be able to go, right? And um, do you see any of these groups that are moving maybe a little bit beyond experimentation and starting to think about? You had mentioned commercial development. I actually see it as more the democratization, right? Commercials within it. I mean, that kind of thing. But I want to make sure that people hear that democratization, because sometimes the commercial side gets demonized because we've been trained to think of space as NASA, government, and ESA and cosmonauts, right? But do you see any of these groups that are actually going beyond? And we can come back if it's something you want to dive into, but that are going beyond um, these activities and starting to form into identifiable groups who are saying, you know what, we're practicing now because we're really going to go. Is that, did you pick up any of that at the conference?
Well, what I think is hilarious about what you said is that I think it's almost flipped on the head, because 90% of the people there were assuming that we're in
Love
on
it.
a trajectory such that it is true that we're all going at some point, or we all could go at some point.
Great.
And if that's true, we could all go at some point, then absolutely everyone at the conference was working towards that. And I think, from my background, I work on technologies. um I'm a basic The reason I'm a futurist is not because I sit on, in my chair and think about what the future is going to be. I sit in my chair and think, I'm an idiot, and smarter people than me have already figured things out. And if that's true, then what's the next thing based on what they've already figured out? And so I live about 10 years in the future in the work that I do.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm living 10 years into the future, what's the assumption, right? What's, if that's the case, when who's going, what's going on? And that's where this conference really does shine, is we're building the groundwork for the assumption that, and I loved your phrasing, of the democratization of space. Because
Mm-hmm.
once commercial is unlocked and it's away from, nation state control, then you've got the democratization. And if that's the case, who needs to go? Well, then what needs to be in place? How are we going to support that? And so I think everyone there at the conference and everyone in the community is kind of living at that assumption level. And what does that mean? What are the implications of that? So I would be willing to bet that a lot of the research being done by this community is going to be a fast follow on to what's being unlocked today by the commercialization.
Perfect. Perfect. All right, Spacers, we're going to be back in a few minutes with our guest, Trent Adams. My name is Rick Tomlinson. This is the Space Revolution, and you're listening to iRock Space Radio, part of the iHeart Radio Network. Hey there, Spacers. Space Revolution time. We're back. I got Trent Adams. He's been working with the Analog Astronaut Conference. He's all pumped up because he just finished it. And I'm pumped up too because I'm just happy to see that such a thing is happening. Trent, we're as we were wrapping up there, we are at that moment. I've been telling people I was at the launch, for Starship, which by the way was a success, and there are more coming, and maybe by the time somebody listens to this, there will have been another one that's already flown. But regardless, it's going to take a little bit of time. By the way, I'm telling people that the revolution really happens here when they land, refuel, and fly again in a couple of days. That's the moment, right? Or for the Star Trek fans, that's when the Vulcans show up. You're dealing with this group of people who are planning to go, and I'm so happy to hear that you were saying like there's international groups, there's people from all over the place, all kinds of people, people that are differently abled, as they say. What do you see as the next step for your organization? I gather you're going to do it again next year at the Biosphere. Um, but tell us a little bit about that. What's going to happen next with you guys? Did you cook up any great plans for what's coming
Uh, yes,
that you can tell us about?
so many great plans. The one that I think that speaks exactly to what you're talking about is, how do you scale up, right? If you, it's all very well and good to do an individual habitat research exercise and then do another individual habitat exercise. But the learnings really come from the scale of the data collected and analyzed. As an astrophysicist, it's all about the what's the n number, right? And small n, not as useful, large n, more useful. And one of the things that we're working on now as a community is the world's biggest analog. And this is something that's never been done before. And again, it's a testament to the communities coming together and finally sharing and being on the same page in the same place. Because as we all know, right, everything's individually funded. Everything's got their backer, and they have their objectives that they need to achieve. And what we're finding through this collaboration is the ability to unlock that next level, and increase that n number of data collection by a significant factor. So we're working currently on the world's biggest analog, and what we're doing is bringing together all the habitat directors. Um, I think we have about half a dozen signed up, and I think we've got eyes on about a dozen of habitats around the world where we will be running a concurrent mission across all of them. And it's we're still working on what that looks like. What does that mean, and how are we going to pull all of these research activities together? But core among them is the sharing of research across all of them, such that we have a large n number, enough to make scientifically valid analysis and conclusions from them. We're still working out whether they're going to be simultaneous or they're going to be sequential. But the idea here is, you have your Mars colony analog, you've got your Moon colony analog, you've got your low Earth orbit colony analog, and they're all working together as if we're in the future and these all exist. How do they communicate with each other? What research are they performing? How can they make sure that everything that is being done in one is being done in a way that's comparable to the other? And these are all difficult questions to answer that no one has been able to address or answer until now. And that's what we're working towards. We've got a couple years of runway room here that we're working on. We're targeting 2025, but you know we've all got our time frames that we need to deal with, because there's a lot of things that are going on. But that's essentially the event horizon we're looking at.
So in 2025, several groups of people representing several locations in space, right? I'm going to bet you have like two or three Mars and two or three Moon and probably a
Exactly right.
couple of free space. Yeah. By the way, I use free space for everything that's not low Earth orbit. The place between, which is, my boss was a guy named Jerry O'Neill, who wrote the High Frontier, and so he was my Obi-Wan, and so I have that bias. Although I love them all, as you can see, I have a book called Return of the Moon here, and all of that. So I'm a cheerleader for all of them. But so you're going to have all these units, these people interacting as if they're in these places. Now, it boggles the mind as to all the different kind of experiments you could do. I mean, you could get into simulated trade. You could get into IP creation, like, hey, I've come up with this thing over here. Maybe you guys can apply it here. Maybe more likely between the Moon and Mars. But the free space people are like, well, we can't use that. That's useless to us. So that I love that. And I guess one of the next steps might be, this one's going to be harder, I would say, is you need to find something like the size of a Coliseum, and you've got like 100 people, or 50 people, let's say,
Yep.
in one place. That's going to be probably harder to do, but I could see that as like downrange, right? Would that make sense? Is
I
something to do?
I love the way you're thinking,
Mm-hmm.
because you're 110% correct.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't go from where we are right now. Right? Where we are right now is each individual having between 4 and 10 crew members for a reasonably short period of time, talking multiple weeks to months or so. Um, and then move from here today to what you just suggested, right? Which is a full blown colony. And we need to get there. And the question is, how do we get there? And yes, so this mission that we're planning currently is going to be geared towards how do we get there.
Mm-hmm.
I'd suggest to what you just said is brilliant. So let's say 2027 or 2030, that's where we need to be. Now, in order to
Mm-hmm.
learn the lessons, in order to get there, we need to do this first step, which is multiple small halves connected. Then we can move to where the colony is. But you're exactly right. I think you're on the right trajectory.
Yeah, I had a couple of years to think about it. So,
It's almost like you know something, Rick.
yeah, it's really. I will say this. It's funny because one of the challenges some of the, um, I guess, the OGs like myself have in this field is, we've had all this time because it's taken too long to think about these things, right? So Dr. O'Neill and Dr. Dyson, his partner, and the rest of them were holding these conferences back in the 90s and the 80s, where you would come in and work on this stuff, right? At Princeton, and really just getting into all of this stuff. It's almost like you want to bring it back out now, and you might even want to. I might even suggest that leading up to next year's event, that you find some of these folks from back then who've worked on this and put them in a session to sort of share some of that early knowledge. I mean,
Yep.
so much of it has been lost. I'm actually thinking about trying to lean on I won't say my buddy, but on Jeff, like somebody like Jeff Bezos, to bring all of that information into a place. Maybe it's the biosphere people. You bring all of it there so it's shareable and people can do research on it and understand how to work with it. And so much of it's going to be wrong, but there's going to be, a couple of times you're going to come, oh, we called it the wheel, it spins, that kind of thing. But look, I'm again, I'm totally thrilled. So let's move on a little bit here. I want to get um, into a couple little other areas here. You are a generalist, and I'm just going to pick on you because of what I see over your shoulder, which I see the Armored Knight suit. I see, I don't know, that's not an ACES suit, but it's a NASA space suit.
A7L. Yep.
Okay, an A7L. I had a spacesuit company at one point called Orbital Outfitters. And I will mention this, and then we'll talk about the alien on the spacesuit, but which I love that touch. One of the thing that's blowing my mind is in our spacesuit company. It was called Orbital Outfitters, and we rolled out a functional emergency get me down suit called the well, it was a get me down suit, and the guy who designed it for us was a medievalist, but he had also done the spacesuits on Firefly, Serenity, um, Space Cowboys, all of these other movies and stuff. And his father had worked for one of the big spacesuit companies on the East Coast. Um, and what was amazing about it, and why I'm just pointing that out behind you, is what he did blew my mind. And you've got a visual representation right there, so I have to talk about it. Um, he used stitching patterns for the materials in like shoulders and elbows and arms that they had used for Armored Knight suits. Because back then, you're carrying all this weight and stuff. And if you're moving your arms around, you can't move them around in a limber fashion. You're dead, right? And what he did was he figured out ways to weave this stuff so it would slip and all of that. So when it came under pressure, because a spacesuit is under pressure, it would be movable. And so we had these videos of him doing jumping jacks and push-ups. And the NASA ACES suit, which is the one the astronauts used to wear up and down in the shuttle, had way less mobility than that. And we went into Johnson Space Center and he met with some folks down there, and their minds were blown. They had, how do you do that? And the funny part was, just as in your illustration or the things behind you, he had gone back 1,000 years, right? And he had adopted and learned from these very, very, very basic technologies that we had forgotten, right? And brought them forward. Now, building on that and bringing it back around to what we were talking about, a lot of that is going to happen out there, right? I mean, you're maybe not going to be chipping stones together to start your fires and stuff, but the very, very basics, not just of technology, but of how people work together, teams operating, all of that. Does that come up a lot with you guys?
Yeah,
And that was a long intro. Forgive me, but
no, I know. I love how you got us here through the conversation, because what I think it boils down to is diversity of conversation in the room,
mm,
and this is
okay.
what literally, I found the most profound takeaway from the Analog Astronaut Community Conference is the diversity of voices in the room. And you're all treated as equals. No one gets preferential voice because you came from this lineage or that lineage, but rather you come to the conversation with what you do, your diverse background, your diverse opinions, your diverse knowledge, and then you shake out what is useful. And I think that's the power of the next phase here is, I do think that there is some value. We look back at NASA and the initial development of these projects. You have to kind of narrow the scope. You've got to get it going to build the ship, to do the thing and get to the point. But now that we've unlocked that achievement, now we have the opportunity to bring other voices in, and that's what we're seeing. And I loved your suggestion there of like, how does spacesuit design, and the reason why behind me here is 12th century knight replica that I had to make. This is a full chainmail set, by the way. This is actually not a costume. It's actually a replica suit. And I often take it to schools and give talks about medieval armor, and of course go to Ren fairs. And at one Renaissance festival, I was wearing my suit, and an Army Ranger came up to me and said, well, he was talking to me about it and asking, what it was like and how much did it weigh. And I'm like, well, this is about 72 pounds of gear. And he said, well, that's interesting because the current modern Rangers carry about 70 pounds of gear. And it's fascinating as we started to talk about this and realize that over time, that amount of weight a human body can carry hasn't changed, right? And the human body hasn't changed that much in the thousands of years. And so essentially that's what you can carry. So what we could carry back in, 12th century is the same as, modern warrior can carry today. And so you kind of think about this and you're like, oh, those are interesting connections. Well, how do you then carry that through to space? How can you carry that through to the next frontier? You know what? That's lessons learning, man. And how do you learn those lessons? It's frankly through these random interactions, these random conversations with people with different skill sets, different experience. And
Perfectly, yeah.
that's how you do like what you suggested. You bring these things forward. And I think that the power that I would like to see in the industry is the openness to new ideas. That doesn't mean all new ideas are good, by the way, but it
Mhm.
means they have to be heard, considered, and then those that succeed and make sense carried forward. Don't dismiss ideas that are not. The other thing you brought up, which I think is fascinating, is the carryover, the cross connect between costuming for fiction and reality. And in fact, one of the people that I met at the Analog Astronaut Conference just last weekend is they own a company who makes their living making spacesuits for film.
Mhm.
They have been tapped by uh, organizations in industry to actually carry them forward and design and develop legitimate spacesuits for exploration. Why? Because they understand what the human body can carry. How does it work? And how can stitch these together such that they work in a hard environment. Like, so I was in space, Star Wars, right? So I was in Force Awakens, and I got to see the costumes that they made for me and how incredibly detailed they were and how incredibly robust and resilient they were, because for days and days and days of filming. Yeah, carry that forward. That's not just fiction. Let's bring that skill into the real world of exploration. So yeah, absolutely. All of these things cross connect, and we just need to be open-minded enough to listen and share.
Perfect. Well, you've set us up for the next section. We're going to have some fun. We're going to talk about you being in Star Wars, the fact that you were a minister and recently married somebody, and things like that. So we're going to come right back after that, after this little break. My name is Rick Tumlinson. You're listening to the Space Revolution here on iRock Space Radio, part of the iHeartRadio network. Our guest is Trent Adams, and we are talking about those squishy things that are all over the sphere. We call them humans, and how they are going to be able to learn to live in space by starting right now in an analog just down the street. Be right back. Welcome back, Spacers. iRock Space Radio, part of the iHeartRadio network. I am Rick Tumulty. You can follow me at Rocket Rick, by the way, on Twitter and LinkedIn. And I have a tendency to just say some stuff now and then about the space field. So log on in anytime you like. Our guest today is Trent Adams. We've been talking about analog astronauts. In the last segment, I forgot that you're going to be largely hearing this on a podcast to start. Trent is talking to me with a knight's armor outfit behind him and a spacesuit. In a very funny way, he just happens to have one of the aliens grabbing the front of the mask of the spacesuit. We won't go there. We'll just skip right by that. And but so your listener, if you didn't understand the context before, that's what we're looking at here. And look, so Trent, you nicely sort of slipped in something that probably just stopped some people. Like, oh my God, you worked on one of the Star Wars films. You were actually a character that showed up in one of them, correct?
Yeah, yeah. I would stop short of saying I worked on it. I would say I lucked into it.
Okay.
The opportunity to be an extra in Star Wars: The Force Awakens. So they were, gracious enough to fly us out to Pinewood Studios to film for a week on The Force Awakens, and this was in Maz's castle. So anybody who wants to see what that scene was, skip forward in Force Awakens. I think about 57 minutes in, and you'll see my 6 seconds or so of fame. And if you have access to the deleted scenes, there's a great scene that we hit the cutting room floor, but it was an absolutely fantastic opportunity.
Oh, great. Well, look, speaking of films, though, you weren't just an extra in a film. You've just dropped a film that you helped work on. I think it's called Adam. Is that correct? Or
Norman, yeah, exactly
Norman?
right.
I'm sorry, Norman. Why did I forget? That's my middle name. Norman, and my father's name. Uh, there's some therapy there. So Norman, tell us about this film. I did put it up on my LinkedIn. Um, you can see it where and tell us what it's about.
Absolutely fantastic experience that I have this tendency to just luck into things. Um, I was actually one of the first 500 people to build a website on the planet. And it just so happened that I happened to know a guy who was dating a girl in Tim Berners-Lee's lab. So we got an early release of HTTP and HTML, and I happened to be able to build one of the first 500 websites, so that was kind of cool. But I just happened into these things. Like when I was at the New England Patriots, I was executive producer for them for 12 years. Just so happened that the craft said, "Hey, video on the internet's going to be a thing." This was in 1996, and they said, could we do that? And so I joined the organization to produce the first nightly online video show, and from there, it's now the longest running. So I have got the first online video show and then the longest running. As long as they keep going, I'm all right there. And so I just kind of stumble into these weird things. Star Wars was another one of those things. I just stumbled into being in the right place at the right time, and got the opportunity to be in the film. And it was an absolutely fantastic, life changing kind of thing when, you grow up, right? Those of us who were, in our era when the first film came out as kids, and now to be able to walk on set, walk into the Millennium Falcon, it was absolutely life changing.
Mm-hmm. But tell us about Norman.
Yeah, so Norman, yeah, so here, that's right. Thanks for that, Rick. To bring us back,
I do it all the
um,
time.
Norman. So the way that this worked, I fell into this. I found this amazing director, Joel Gelzo, and he was trying to get his indie film produced. And the reason I guess I gave the background is that I have a background as being an executive producer and understand how these things are made. And a lot of times indie filmmakers don't quite get all of the different steps and mechanics and all these things, and frankly, the budget that's necessary to get from point A to point B. And I joined him in his journey. He was about 5 years in. And then it took another 3 to 4 years to actually complete. Um, but this is typical of independent filmmaking. So I've been around, the independent filmmaking scene for years, and all of the folks I've ever talked to say it's about average of 7 years to develop from start to finish. And so I joined him about 5 years in and helped. Uh, I helped with completion funding. And the completion funding essentially means all the things that you don't even really realize you need to do until you get to the end. So Foley editing, audio editing is an example, and then also color grading, and then the color grading, which is the final step prior to posting. And it was been an amazing opportunity to help this independent filmmaker who just, by the way, is releasing his next documentary. Um, and so, I find these great people who are doing great things. I can't contribute anything. They're geniuses in their own. What do? I just kind of help grease the wheels. And that's what I do, is help grease the wheels. And that's kind of how I fell into that.
And by the way, color grading, explain real quick.
Yeah, color grading is this thing that most people don't understand. When you shoot a film with multiple cameras or from multiple angles or with multiple lighting setups, that when you capture the images, the color looks different shot to shot to shot. So if you did no color grading and you just cut those shots together, it would be very jarring to you as the audience because the color would change constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And so what the color grader does is the last step prior to printing the film is to tune each of those shots, each individual shot, to make sure that the color matches shot to shot to shot. The other thing that they add is the thematic color. So all films that anybody's paying attention to have a common color palette, and then the color grader's job is to make sure that that color palette matches all the way through.
Mm-hmm. Cool little Hollywood lesson for the upcoming filmmakers as well. Um, so I appreciate your trip because in a way we have some stuff in common, and that is that when you try to explain who this person is, it's hard, right? You're like I said, a Renaissance dude, a generalist, and somebody who is kind of influencing the world all over, and I truly appreciate that. The What we're about to see coming up in the world, just your perspective. What do you think it offers us, people listening, young people who are listening, others? We have an audience around the world here and there. Um, what do you think about what's happening right now? Just your thoughts in the space field, and how it relates to the planet, because what you are engaged in a very human activity, right? Analog astronauts, about as human as you get, putting people, locking them up in a little place together to see how they get along. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I love the phrasing that you brought to it, right? Which is the human element. And too often when we the community think of space, we think of the technical element, the technosphere, as it's called within the biosphere too. Space is you think of the technology needed, um, and in reality, it's the human experience that really is what we're all working towards, whether we know it or not. Technology is a tool, but it's the human experience that's the goal. And one of the things that I also am doing as executive producer for the Cosmic Perspective is it's a project where we're documenting the narrative of human space exploration. There's a lot of folks that are documenting this next wave of commercialization of space. They're either rocket chasing, right? They're describing what's going on with the rocket development today,
Mm-hmm.
or they're talking about the news of which rocket has launched when and where. What we're bringing to the table with Cosmic Perspective is, well, what does that mean to the human? What's the feeling of that? What is the poetry, the artistry of being part of that? And that's where I think the power is. So I would say that in the in the coming wave, as we're all looking to this, is what does it mean to be human in space exploration? Not what is it, what technology do we need, but what does it mean to be human? And I would be willing to say that within the next 20 years, we will unlock that next achievement. And that next achievement is going to be something I don't think is knowable right now. I literally don't think we can guess. We could try to guess, but I don't think we'd be right. I think we just need to prepare ourselves for what does that mean as soon as we've unlocked that next human potential. And I think that that's what we're all gearing towards within the analog astronaut community is being prepared for unlocking that next potential.
Fantastic. Great. Very well said. So the my traditional hardcore questions that I have to ask you before I let you out the airlock here, and that is, so you're cruising above the moon, several thousand clicks per hour, so you can feel the motion. You're coming up over the horizon. You're in your little pod there. What are you jamming to? What are you listening to?
I I so love that question, Rick. Honestly, I'm listening to the music by Anu,
Yeah.
who is a really good friend of mine, Mary Liz Bender, stage name Anu. She does this amazingly ethereal music that she performs with her hands using a technology called Mimu gloves
Mm-hmm.
as her instruments. And through the beautiful motion of her hands, is she creating this tapestry of music that I carry through in my day-to-day life as if we were to see the overview effect, right? Is as that is flowing over you, this as Frank White has shared with us
Mm-hmm.
all, the overview effect of being above the celestial bodies we live on. That's the music that's playing in my ears.
That's beautiful, and I've seen people who play that instrument, and it's amazing to watch and hear. I also love the fact that you couldn't see this, but as I was asking the question, Frank, I mean Trent leaned his head back and closed his eyes and was like, "You were there in the moment." That was quite beautiful, actually. So, what's your favorite science fiction film? I'm kind of guessing I know, but maybe I don't.
Honestly, I hate to tell you this, it's Blade Runner.
Awesome.
Blade Runner is probably one of the best films, if not the best films, for all of its myriad levels and depths. Because as we talk about going off world, you look back at what's left behind. And in
Mm-hmm.
that dystopian vision of moving off world, who's left behind? And that is a narrative that is very influential to me is we're all humans, we're all humanity. Who is this that gets off world? But who's left behind? How can we democratize this? So Blade Runner.
Right, because science fiction is both aspirational and a warning sometimes
I
as
agree.
well.
I
Right,
agree.
what we can do and what we should avoid. That's kind of the nature of real science fiction. It's not all rainbows and space unicorns. Right, it's
Yep.
what we should not do. It's a choice. Um, all right, so we've got that science fiction book author.
Oh, very easy. Uh Neuromancer by William Gibson.
Whoa.
The
Okay, I
absolute
like it.
best opening line that I think is hilarious because it doesn't work with my kids today. Best opening line in a science fiction book is the sky was a television tuned to a dead channel. You and I know what that means. We get it. We're like, oh, it was a gray, kind of oppressive image. And my kids read that today and say, oh, so it was really pretty blue. I'm like, no,
Perfect.
no, you missed the point of what Gibson was trying to say. and it just
Mm.
didn't carry through, over time. But amazing book, amazing, absolutely amazing fiction that tells us something, I think, about humanity.
Oh, that's fantastic. So we have kids and well, people of all ages who are maybe kids at heart here who think about this field, obviously, or they wouldn't be tuned in or listening to this. What would you say to them? Sort of our final statement here. What would you say to them about what's coming and what their part in it can be? Um,
I
yeah,
would,
what would you say?
yeah, I'd speak to that in two ways. One is to the kids, but the other is to the parents. And when I say parents, I mean, frankly, the entire village, right? Everybody who's raising these kids. Um, and I think that the future is optimistic. The future is what we make it. The future is what you want to explore and how you want to bring it, into reality. It's all starts with imagination. It is carried through with passion, and then through execution. And I think kids learning the diversity of skills necessary to bring their vision to reality is, let's encourage that. It's all things. It's everything any kid wants to do and think about and bring forward into a positive, way into the future. The second part of the story is to the parents and to the folks teaching these kids is encourage that behavior. Don't stifle, don't drive in one direction or another. Hear and listen to what their passion is and support it. Because we need all of these visions, all of this passion to come together to bring us to the next phase of exploration.
Beautiful. Very well said. Trent, it's been a massive pleasure. As I told you at the beginning, a lot of the times I have some old friends come on, but when I have a new friend like yourself, and I think we are going to end up being friends, um, what I really enjoy is the voyage of discovering you, your thoughts, what you're working on, who you are, and the contribution you're making to now and the future. And this has been a wonderful ride. And I want to thank you for being on board. And dear listeners, thank you, my spacer friends. You have been listening to the Space Revolution. My name is Rick Tumlinson. The show, the channel, the venue that you're getting this through, the wavelength that's the carrier for the signal is called iRock Space Radio. We're part of iHeart, and we are out of the airlock.